like-minded persons. Today, my guest is Nikola Danaylov. Nikola is author of bestselling Conversation with the Future, keynote speaker, futurist, strategic advisor, podcast host, and popular blogger. Hello, Nikola.
Hi, Alex. It's nice to talk to you.
Me as well. Okay, Nikola, I know that your time is tremendously valuable, and I appreciate that you today with me. So let's jump in immediately to our topics. Nikola, today we are in the beginning of the new 2020 year and in the beginning of new decade. What's your plans for the new year and new decade? What's your aims and what you will try to achieve in this year and decade?
Well, hopefully I would try to I would attempt to do what I have been doing for the past 10 or 15 years of my life in a lot better and more effective way than I have been doing in the past. Namely, that's my desire to bring ancient wisdom into new technology. In other words, what I'm trying to do with my life is to have an impact on the conversation of advanced technology such as artificial intelligence, genetics, robotics, nanotech, synthetic biology, 3D printing, cryptocurrencies, and so on, and show and bring ethics into that conversation, because I believe that the most important decisions that this very crucial 21st century and in this very crucial decade of the 21st century may actually have a tremendously large and lasting impact on our civilization. And that could lead to, if we do the wrong ethical choices, that could lead to tremendous suffering and maybe even extinction, like, for example, in the case of nuclear war. Or on the upside, we can accomplish things that we have never accomplished before in our civilization. We can accomplish real abundance. We can remove or extinguish poverty. We can defeat infectious disease. We can cure all kinds of incurable diseases, and perhaps maybe even death, because many people believe that death is a curable disease and are actually investing billions of dollars in working on that as we speak. So basically, we are open to a utopia or a dystopia and everything in between. Those are the spectrum of our possible futures. And so what I'm trying to bring into this conversation is the importance of ethics, as I believe it will be one of the determinant, if not the very most important determinant factor that can decide which way we may end up going.
Amazing. Great. So the most interesting and important topic for me, it's aging process. So you one of the person who agree that that aging is a disease, yeah?
Yes, with some qualifications perhaps, but absolutely yes. And the qualifications, because you may ask or others may ask, are the following. So I do believe that aging is a disease to the extent that we can do something about it. And we can do something about it in two ways. First of all, at the very simple, most basic level, we can do something in terms of slowing the aging process simply by our life choices, by our epigenetics, by the things that we do, basic things like healthy diet, active lifestyle, non-smoking, non-drinking, etc. That's like probably what could take us to 100 years or so, give or take, individually, if we have a healthy lifestyle. Now, beyond that, we cannot get with those choices. Beyond that, we need science and technology. And with the help of science and technology, we could be able to extend that to many hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. What I don't think we can accomplish is to have that indefinite. I don't think that human lifespans would last forever. I mean, if you think about it, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, I don't know. But a star is born and a star eventually dies, though that star may live for 10 billion years. Humans will eventually die even after we discover how to defeat aging and how to extend our lives indefinitely. Accidents will happen. Conflict will continue to happen probably. People would commit suicide or choose not to extend their lifetime. So, and eventually, even the universe may come to an end. So, I am all for defeating aging, and I am all for extending it as long as we wish. Each of us should be able to determine, especially the time of death, ideally, so that, you know, I don't know if I want to live forever, but I do know that I don't want to die when I don't want to die. So maybe after 800 years instead of 80 years, maybe after 800 years I'll be, quote, bored, as some people are afraid that may be the case, even though I don't think that will be the case. But maybe I would. But I don't think that after 80,000 years things would not change. Things will definitely change in the universe. The only thing that's constant is change, and nothing really lasts forever, not even the universe itself. So all for life extension, all for defeating aging as a disease, with that qualification that at the end of the day, maybe after thousands of years, everything will come to an end. So, maybe millions or billions of years.
Okay, great. So you consider that we are able to significant extend lifespan, but we are not able to be immortal.
So look, the universe is not able to be immortal, as I said, as far as we know, or at least forget about the universe. The little red dwarf, the stars are not immortal. Stars are born, they're formed, they create galaxies around them, and eventually they explode in a supermassive supernova and become maybe a black hole. So, you know, yeah, so I don't see any evidence that suggests to us that we are never going to be able to defeat human aging and that we're never going to be able to prolong life multiple times longer than it currently is. However, I do think that there's tons of evidence that suggests that eventually that would also come to an end, right? Because we have entropy in the universe and we have change. And as I said, not the stars, not the galaxies, not even the universe itself lasts forever. So everything has a beginning, that has a beginning, like the universe, possibly or likely will have an end.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, perfect. Okay, tell me please, Nikola, tell me please about universal basic income. I know that universal basic income get value in Canada, or I am mistaken. What's happened with it in Canada?
Okay, so there's two experiments that happened in Canada with respect to universal basic income. So the original experiment was, I think, in the early to mid 1970s, actually, so a long time ago, and was conducted in one of the Canadian prairie provinces in like a small little town of, I believe it was about 1,500 people or so, where I forget if it was 6, 9, 12 or 18 months, but basically at that time, almost everybody of working age, or a voting age, I should say, was given a lump amount of sum of money per month, and then there were conducted all kinds of survey and data gathering of information to see what the effect and what the results of that were. Interestingly enough, what happened at the time was the government changed and it scrapped that program. So no one went to analyze the results of that experiment for a very, very, very long time. And then I think, well, I shouldn't say very, very, I should say maybe a decade. And then in the mid-1980s to early 1990s, I think, if I remember, there was a university professor, researcher, who dug out that case and started analyzing the data that was gathered. And what he found out was that in that particular case, almost in every possible way, the standard of living of that community had improved. And that was, first, crime rate dropped. Second, there were fewer homeless people. Third, people started reporting less to require access to healthcare, like, for example, the emergency room visits per capita of the population diminished. People actually, I think they dropped weight. There were all kinds of healthy outcomes with respect both to the individual and with respect to the community in general. And as I said, things like health parameters of individuals, fewer visits that required medical care and hospitalization, lower rates of crime, lower rates of homelessness, even psychological benefits of all kinds of effects. So that was the first example in Canada where we had an experiment of that kind. Now, there was to be another much bigger example than this. And the Ontario government had a rolling plan and even began implementing universal basic income here in Ontario. The problem was we had an election, and just like last time, the government lost the election, and the new government, the Conservative government of Doug Ford, basically scrapped
refuse of this,
scrapped all the previous programs of the Liberals. So no result on the newer test, which was supposed to roll much bigger and much better and much more ambitious plan in many ways, never actually happened properly. So that's kind of like my understanding of what happened with universal basic income in Canada. Now, the good news is that hopefully there are many other communities in the world which are either already doing this kind of experiment or are planning to do this kind of experiment in the very near future. And so there's places in Africa that are already doing that. There's all kinds of...
I heard.
Yes, in Finland, that's been a case that actually already finished. I think it was running for a year, and a number of, I forget the number, 10,000 or I forget how many people of their population were getting something like 1,000 euros a month, I think, for that 1 year. But that experiment is over also already in Finland. And so we need probably to have a proper scientific survey of this. We need, first of all, to establish a proper experiment where we have consistency of the experiment across different places and cultures, and then we can hopefully observe the effects both across cultures, but also as within itself as an experiment, speaking of universal basic income. So we know that in Switzerland, for example, there was a referendum, public referendum pertaining to universal basic income, and we know that 80% of the people voted against it. However, in cosmopolitan centers like, for example, Zurich, 80% of the population actually voted in favor of universal basic income. And by the way, the Swiss proposal for universal basic income was probably the most ambitious such proposal that I have heard so far, because if I'm not mistaken, they were talking about something like almost 3,000 euros per month that the government was going to provide to their citizens. So we're not talking like, for example, in the United States, there's proposals ranging from 6 to 8 to $900, usually less than 1,000, and so on. We're talking, 3,000 euros, which is, $4,000 or $5,000. So
US dollar. Yeah.
it's a very substantial amount of money, and that's also another thing that I want to say is that I don't even think it should be called because some people call it guaranteed minimum income or basic income. I think it should be called guaranteed maximum income. So we should find out as a society or as a sort of a political and ethical decision, what's the optimum, not the minimum, but the optimum amount of money that each citizen should be entitled to receive, so that it kind of optimizes the general standard of living, the general happiness index, and optimize society in general, I believe.
Okay, what's your forecast to the end of this decade? Will the universal basic income real for humankind or no?
Well, I would say it would be likely a mixture. So first of all, let me just step back and say that prediction is the worst thing you can do. So the best thing we can do is basically what's called scenario planning. And we should consider the different future possibilities, and we should sort of delineate sort of future possible decision trees, and then look for the benchmarks that can indicate whether we're along this branch of the future or that particular branch of the future. And this is basically how foresight works. However, crudely, very, very crudely put. However, I think that when it comes to universal basic income, by the end of the decade, there will be tons of experiments, and there may be even many communities which have already implemented it. But there also would be many that for one reason or another have not done so. And so I think that it would be some kind of a mixture. And of course, that's kind of like the safest prediction. I hope that it would be more like, for example, the legalization of gay marriage, where, 10 years ago, no one thought that would be possible in the United States at all. And today it's a fact, or the legalization of marijuana, for example. Yeah, the same thing, right? 10 years ago, people thought that would never happen. It's totally impossible. Now, in the United States, in Canada, in many other, Canada has, gay marriage has been legal in Canada much earlier, of course, in the United States. But recently we legalized marijuana. And so, and now it's basically like, for example, alcohol. There's a legal minimum age, and then you can buy it legally. So I hope that it goes kind of, the public acceptance of the idea of guaranteed basic income would go along this kind of development, and hopefully surprise us by the speed of its adoption. But I suspect that many communities around the world, for one reason or another, will fail to surprise us in a good way. And I would not be surprised if many actually surprise us in a good way, that they move way ahead of schedule on that. And so I think that in the end of the day, it will be more of a mixture.
Okay, great. So let's cover next topic, mainstream topic, AI. Is AI our last invention?
I don't think AI would be our last invention unless we... The only way that AI, let me qualify that. The only way that AI would be our last invention is if we use AI to destroy ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
If we use AI for primarily military or aggressive, violent purposes, then it could possibly be our last invention, because in a combination where you have artificial intelligence, terrorism, rogue states such as, for example, North Korea, nuclear wars, nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons, genetics, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, and you combine all of these elements together, you have an explosive mixture that can literally destroy our civilization. So if that's the case, then in that sense, AI could in fact turn out to be the last invention. However, if we look on the upside, it is unlikely that AI would be our last invention, because AI is very good at particular things, like, for example, analyzing tremendously large amounts of data and figuring out new ways of connecting that data, manipulating it, and coming up with unique approaches of processing it and unique insights of that data. However, you still need human creativity for a number of things which AI is still incapable of doing. For example, actual proper learning in what's called an open system. So far you can say, well, AI already learns. Yes, AI learns chess, AI learns, for example, Go, and things like that, or how to play certain kind of games from the 1980s and the 1990s and so on. But those are all closed systems. Our real world, however, our universe is not a closed system. It is an open system. And so there's always a new kind of phenomenon happening in our universe. And humanity has been inclined, and we don't know exactly how it works yet, but humanity has been wired to learn incredibly quickly from its observations. So, for example, if you have a human baby needs to see one or two cats or dogs, and then for the rest of their life, they will be able to identify any cat and dog, no matter whether it's big or small, what color is it, what its particular breed features may be, and so on. An AI cannot do that with one or two cats. An AI can do that with, like, probably billions, maybe even tens of billions of cats. And then the AI would only give you, a 99% accuracy if you're really lucky. But humans give you almost 100% accuracy, especially when it comes to cats and dogs. Like, it's rare that someone confuses a cat and a dog, so most humans would give you 100% accuracy on that. If an AI gives you 99% accuracy on millions and millions of pictures of cats and dogs, billions, that would still mean that they get it wrong millions of times. So there's still things that and again, the speed of learning what a cat is and what a dog is incomparable. And finally, there's a lot to be said about human creativity and about how, together with machines, we can enhance our human creativity in all kinds of amazing ways. So, in other words, if we do not destroy ourselves, AI would certainly not be the last invention, because after we have invented AI, we would use AI so that together, as a team, we can invent even newer and better things than ever before. And that process can continue for a very long time. So I would say, at least for the foreseeable future, unless we're stupid enough to bring about our own self-destruction, which again will not be the fault of the AI, but it will be entirely our own fault of how we're using that AI. And this is, again, where the ethical choices that we make come into play, right? This is why I try to work about ethics, because where and how we employ AI is not a technical decision. It's not an engineering or scientific decision. It's an ethical decision. It's an ethical choice. And so, because you see, knowledge is important, but knowledge without purpose is useless. Because you need a purpose in order to decide whether to apply and what kind of knowledge to apply to a particular context in a particular situation. And that purpose comes from a framework, a narrative that contains an ethical element in it and carries the charge of an ethical value once that choice and once that decision is made, right? So that decision comes from outside the scientific realm, outside of the engineering realm, outside of the technology realm. It comes from us, and it's coming from the ethical realm. And if we mess that up, we can destroy ourselves, and therefore it could be the last invention we ever make. But I hope it won't be, and it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And all of my work that I've done for the last 10 years, 15 years has been to sort of minimize that case scenario of our future. It's still possible, but to minimize it as much as possible by raising awareness, by discussing with some of the biggest movers and shakers in the world, by having public debates about the importance of ethics, by educating people, by keynote speaking both at corporations and at public gatherings about the importance of those things, and the importance of public engagement and participation in that decision-making process, because the future is way too important to be left to entrepreneurs and engineers and scientists. We all need to be responsible, and we are all responsible for the future, not only individually, but also collectively, as a future of our countries and as a future of our planet and our species and our civilization.
Perfect. Okay, Nikola, from your point of view, how can average people be prepared for AI?
So the first
education, maybe what's something else.
Right. So the first step to realize is that because everyone would like to think that what they do is totally unique. Everyone would like to think that they are never going to be replaced by a machine, be it artificial intelligence, be it a physical robot. And everyone would like to think that they're one of a kind. The reality is that 99% of us are not. And so, first of all, we have to honestly embrace the fact that it is more likely than not that what we do personally and professionally is likely to be either partially or fully automated with an artificial intelligence at some point or another in our future. So then what we need to do is educate ourselves on that process and find a way. The most valuable part in that future would be the human part, right? And find a way to be the human in the future, to be that creator in the creative sense of the world, of the word and the world, to be able to ride the wave of technological change that's coming at us, like surfers do, rather than deny the tsunami of change that's coming our way, and then be surprised and be drowned and go extinct like the dinosaurs. And when I say go extinct like the dinosaurs, I mean just like, for example, most, blacksmiths in the 19th century who used to do horseshoes for the horses went extinct after the introduction of the automobile. Yes, we still have today some blacksmiths, but they are very, very, very few, and they work in very specific, very few community. And now their labor is considered to be extremely artisanal and unique, and sort of it has a historical significance and elements to it rather than a practical one. You know what I mean? And most of the horseshoe blacksmiths, it used to be the case where every community or every small little village would have one blacksmith, because people had horses and every horse had to get horseshoes. Then you had to have a saddle maker, someone who makes the saddles for the horses or their bridles and stuff like that. So most of those people had to go obsolete within a very short period of time of 1 to 2 decades, right? So imagine ourselves that we are in the 19th century and we are all blacksmiths, horseshoe makers, and saddle makers right now in one way or another. And again, our instinct and self-preservation instinct would like to scream at us and tell us, no, we're different. No, we're unique. So walk along with me a little bit here and just consider that as a thought experiment, if you will, and ask yourself, okay, if we imagine that my job would be like that blacksmith, then how do I know if that's the case or not? And if I presume for a moment that that would be the case, then what can I do to ride the wave of change rather than be destroyed by it, right? And then, so if you're in the 19th century, maybe instead of being a blacksmith, you could become a truck driver. Back in the day, there were very many new job opportunities for truck drivers, for mechanics, for people who worked on the production line making automobiles and so on and so on. So now, if we live in a totally new world where most manual and physical labor may end up being automated in one way or another, to one degree or another, by the machines, then the most valuable part would remain the human part, the part that humanizes it, the part that makes it unique. So you should ask yourself, how is it that I can make this product or this work or this job only mine, uniquely mine, that no one else can do in the world? How can I make one part maybe of that whole job that I do now, maybe 90% of it will be automated, because there's a manual for that 90%. And by the way, that's one of the ways you can understand whether you're in danger of being automated or not. Is there a manual for your job? If there is a manual for your job, it will be automated, okay? Because a manual is basically an algorithm, a recipe of how you do something, of how you accomplish a goal. It's like a cookbook of how you do your work. And machines will be able to be programmed alongside each step of that cookbook of your job, and will be able to do most, if not all, of what you do. So ask yourself, instead of being a cook in the kitchen of the future, how can I become a one-of-a-kind chef so that my products, my dishes are uniquely recognizable like mine, so that they cannot be easily replicated by the machines or by other people? In other words, how can I become a category of one so that there is no manual for me? And that human touch, that uniqueness, that artisanal value, that's what's going to be valuable. And a lot of it, by the way, is related to our own personal values and ethics and our emotional labor, because that's what makes a piece absolutely unique. Artists take their work personally. So this is how we can prepare. First, start by educating yourself. Then ask yourself, how can I become a category of one? And then basically ask yourself, how can I ride the wave of change instead of being destroyed of it? And now each of us will find different ways, unique ways to adapt to that future. We can't all have, that's why I can't give you a universal solution for everybody. Because the problem with the future is that there's no GPS for the future. There's no map for the future. I can't give you the manual of how you would survive. Unfortunately, and that's also a kind of a very disruptive moment, is that each one of us has to do a lot of the work of figuring out where they would fit into that future. But of course, there's a lot to be said about the systemic, political, social, community systems that can also streamline this process. And this is again where universal basic income comes to play, right? So for example, if we have a well-implemented universal basic income, and most people never actually find how to do this thing called a work or a job, that's still going to be okay, because, you know, the thing called job is an invention of the Industrial Revolution. People never really had a job before the Industrial Revolution, right? So, I mean, you can say, well, there were cobblers and there were, you know, blacksmiths, you know, 2,000 years ago. But that was not like exactly what we call today a job. It never was a 9-to-5 thing. It was more of a calling. It was it was even stronger than a calling. It was basically what a father would give to his son, to his great-grandson, and so on. It would stay in the family. You know, if you were a shepherd, chances are your children were shepherds. Chances are your grandparents were shepherds. If you're a blacksmith, the same, and so on and so on. So those were not jobs; those were things that you're born with. And there was this thing didn't of course the economic capitalistic system did not exist at the time, so it was a very different kind of a mindset of how those things used to be approached. And people, by the way, used to have a lot of leisure time, a lot more leisure time than we do have today. So, for example, if we go all the way back to the hunter-gatherer society, the estimates are that most hunter-gatherers, on average, used to work about 22 to 25 hours per week, and the rest of the time was basically leisure time. Today, most people work 40 hours a week, and if you live in North America, it's not uncommon to see people doing 60, 70, 80 hours a week, if not more. No or very little vacation and stuff like that. So if we play this right, this automation in combination with the universal basic income can actually be the most beneficial and the most liberating phenomenon in our society. On the other hand, if we don't play it right and we have this massive automation leading to massive unemployment and lack of universal basic income, where people lack the means to put food on their table and find a shelter and things like that, then that could lead to massive upheaval and eventually violence and revolution, because we know that statistically speaking, social polarization, especially economic polarization, is the best indicator for a revolution, right? So, I mean, that was true in the French Revolution. That's true about most revolutions. So, Russian Revolution, you name it, Chinese Revolution, and so on and so on. So, the best way, therefore, to minimize the chance of social upheaval and social revolution and violent civil war with all of its, negative externalities, would be to ensure that we have a very sophisticated minimum social standard, which provides most, if not most, of the requirements for us to have a safe, healthy, long and rewarding life.
Okay, great. So what's going on with our education?
Well, so
with our traditional system, because I feel that our traditional system, I mean that this system went from industrial age, get failure now, and it's quite useless.
So the whole education system came to existence together with the Industrial Revolution, and the whole point of the educational system was to provide obedient, disciplined workers to the industrialists. That's the whole point. That's why, for example, when you go to work, you have a buzzer that announces the beginning of the day and announces the end of the day if you work in a factory. When you have a buzzer that says when the production line is live, and then the production line at the end of the day stops and the buzzer goes off. The same is with school. You have a buzzer. Then you have in the factory products arranged chronologically with respect to their production date. In school, you have children, regardless of their personal capacities and mental aptitude to any given subject, all children are grouped with respect to their manufacturing date, right? And just like when in a factory you have a defective product on the line and you send it back to be fixed, when a student fails math or some other test, it's defective, it's being sent back a class. So the manufacturing model was embraced thoroughly by the educational system, because the educational system is not created to incentivize creativity and inventiveness in initiative. Quite on the contrary, the educational system was created to stamp out entrepreneurship and creativity, but rather to instill discipline and obedience. Because in the 18th and 19th and early 20th century, what was needed was disciplined and obedient workers who would follow instructions. They would follow the manual and they would never deviate, right? And they would basically regurgitate the same action on the production line over and over again. Just like in school, all we had to do was take the test and regurgitate the same information that we were given by the teacher. And so it wasn't important in school to know how the world works or what the truth is. What was important is to know what's on the test, right? But the world that we live in today, in the Industrial Revolution is over. So now we have the new robotic and AI revolution happening, and therefore that kind of educational system is grossly failing and insufficient, as you pointed out, because now we don't need cogs in the machine of our society. Now we need thinking people. Now we need people who are creative, who are entrepreneurial, who take responsibility for their actions, and who are risking to fail to try new things. All of those things which were punished in the school and in the educational system. And so, generally speaking, I think that education is one of the most important things in our lives, but education is not something that someone can give to you. Education is basically what you give yourself. You know, your parents can love you so much and they can pay for the best schools for you to go to and help you out in so many ways. But unless you're actually an active participant, they can never do that against your will. Unless you're an active participant, proactively trying to give yourself that education, they can never do that. And the kind of education that would matter in the future is precisely the education that we give ourselves. And for example, and this is again connected to my kind of main mission in life. In the past, in the Industrial Revolution, the most important education was the technical education, and the importance, as I said, of following orders and obedience and discipline. In the future, the most important education may be the ethical education, because we're all agents of change in our universe to one degree or another, and we need to take responsibilities for our personal as well as our collective actions, and those are ethical choices. And therefore, one of the best kinds of educations for the future, especially when everything will be automated, would actually become more and more the humanities. And they would remain the unique sphere of influence for a much, maybe not forever, but for a much longer time than usual. Things like poetry, music, ethics, aesthetics, all kinds of artistry and unique things of different kinds where there's no manual. And again, the importance of ethics would play all across the board there. And that's why I think that the education should shift not only towards what now is called STEM, but science, technology, engineering, and math. But actually, we need a lot of humanities in that STEM. We need ethics. We need, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and Epicurus and all the philosophers thereafter. Because the world that we live in will be created or destroyed by those decisions that we make, both within the next decade and surely within the next century. But maybe we don't even have a whole century. Maybe it's going to be just the next decade.
So self-education, yeah, it's key to...
Self-education is the best education you can get, because it's the education that you give yourself. And it's also, education is a never-ending process. There's only a beginning, there's never an end. It's like the Japanese concept of Do in the martial arts. Do is the way. And the way is basically, you can start on the way, but you can never finish and get to the end. you only get better in time, but you never actually reach perfection. You never reach to the end. So you can only walk along the way, but you never get anywhere other than only with respect to yesterday. You get a little further than yesterday, hopefully, but you never get to some kind of a perfect outcome that would stay forever. You know, perfection is a never-changing target, and it's very context dependent. And so as the world changes, as the civilization that we live in changes, as the technology, as the technological, social, religious, legal, ethical, economic frameworks that we operate within change, we must change too in order to adapt to that world and in order to survive and in order to thrive, hopefully, right? And so that's the education. It used to be the case also. That used to come with the sort of the industrialist concept of an education was, okay, all I need to do is study in university until I'm 25. And if I do really, really well, then for the rest of my life, I'm going to have a job and I don't have to learn anymore. I'm going to be guaranteed a good job and a retirement and, you know, social insurance or medical care and all of that. That used to be the idea of the 19th and 20th century. That's no longer the case. So now we are all forced to educate ourselves all the time, constantly, because the world is changing so fast. Our knowledge becomes obsolete so fast in any field that you can imagine that we have to constantly work on improving ourselves and get better in every possible way.
And what about traditional schools and universities? How they should make changes.
So now, look, if you are going into like medicine...
Nikola, sorry for interrupting. I mean that, you cannot learn online, for example, such subjects like biology, because you, and to do it self-education in biology, for example, genetic engineering.
So for example, if you want to be, for example, a brain surgeon, okay, you need to go to school for that. I can understand and I can appreciate that. Fine. You want to be a brain surgeon, you need to go to school, you need to do and it takes a very long time. So in Canada, it's almost 10 years, I think, of education before you're able to do that. Now that I totally understand and I totally accept, and you have to be monitored and mentored by your peers and by your older people with much longer experience and all that. But that's not necessarily the same model everywhere else. It's no longer the case. So take biology. You know, I don't think that you require to study biology in the classic sense anymore if you want to be somebody like Charles Dickens, and if you want to have impact on biology. All you need to do is read the and that's not just all, but read all the literature before that, and then try and see where you can have your difference, where you can make an impact, where you can have a dent, you can make a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs used to say, right? And for that, you don't need a PhD in biology. You don't need to spend $150,000 in education, and that, you know, people here in North America, especially in the United States, people pay their student loans for decades, you know. So I am a great supporter of education, but especially expensive schools that nowadays can charge $30,000 to $50,000 a year, and so a 4-year degree there could cost you like $200,000. I really don't think that the value of that education is that much better than the education in many cases that you can either give yourself alone or you can get, you know, in a much cheaper educational institution that's going to cost you 10 times less. In other words, I don't believe in the papers anymore in most of those situations. I don't believe that there's that Stanford and Harvard are so much better if you really care about your subject and your biology and learning your field, maybe biology, maybe music, maybe poetry, maybe ethics. Nobody is stopping you to go in the public library and get that education for free. Or maybe, I think maybe here in Canada it costs like, I don't know, $4 a year to get like a membership in the public library, which one ticket for the public transport is $3.25. So it's like for the price of a bus ticket, usually you can pay like the cost of the card that's going to provide membership to the greatest minds in the history of our civilization to you for free. And now, actually, you don't even need to do that because most of their books are available online for free, you know? So you don't even need to do that as long as you actually care and as long as you actually take it personal, meaning that you take personal responsibility for the outcome of your goals in your decisions, right? It's not because the other thing is that when you actually go to a university, you're off the hook in many ways because you say, oh, it's my professors, they taught me this, it's not my fault. Or, oh, my professors told me I should do this and not do that. And therefore I am the way I am. Or, oh, I couldn't do this because I didn't have this and this professor available to me. Now those excuses don't work anymore. And especially when you're paying for that tens of thousands of dollars, it's absolutely not worth it, in my opinion. So again, if you want to be brain surgeon, sure, go learn with the best people in the world. You have to. You have no choice in that particular case, like medicine and so on. And there's also other professional organizations, maybe like engineering, where that could help a lot. There's many other fields, like, for example, the humanities, where I do not think that you need to spend $250,000 to become a PhD in philosophy. You can do philosophy and learn philosophy as long as you're committed to doing so in a public library for 1/1,000,000th of a cost that would cost you to go to a, American university.
Great. You inspired me. Okay. Okay, we will wrap up our conversation. Nikola, how can somebody be involved in your activity and support you?
Well, so look, my activity is to, as I said, to make people stop and think about the importance of ethics and ethical choices in their own life, especially with respect to technology, such as artificial intelligence, genetics, robotics, nanotech, synthetic biology. And so it's not about me, you supporting me, but I would have done my job well if you actually do that for yourself in your own life, right? I'm not doing what I'm doing for me. I'm not doing so that you can come support me in any way. At best, I mean, I do have a podcast and I have a blog and I have a book. So if you want to watch my podcast episodes, I've done 240 of them. I have a best-selling book called Conversations with the Future, and I've written probably 1,000 blog posts. So if you want to go and educate yourself and you think that my materials, which I have created for you for free, by the way, just as we discussed, absolutely for free, then I would have done my job if you go and use those, but you don't have to. And so it's not that I do it for you to support me. I do it to support you. So if you do what's best for you within an ethical choice and a cognizant framework that what we do in this world makes a difference, either for the good or for the bad, both for you, but also for the people around you, and maybe for all of us on our planet, like, for example, in the context of global warming. So if you're cognizant of the implications of those choices and their ethical costs and benefits, then I would have done my job, because my blogging name is Socrates, and Socrates was this sort of a philosophical father figure in the Western philosophy world, where he had dozens upon dozens of students who founded all kinds of different philosophical schools that were mutually incompatible with each other. And the reason for that was that he never brainwashed anybody with his so-called education. That's why he denied that he educated people. He refused to say that he ever taught anyone anything. What he did, though, was what Plato called a symposium. which in the ancient Greek world was basically a drinking party. A party where people go to have a drink, to have some food, and to have a nice conversation on very important topics. Topics such as ethics, aesthetics, law, religion, piety, friendship, poetry, beauty, life, death, war, the future, the past, history, and so on, good, evil, and things like that. And so the idea was that at the end of the day, after the party was over, people would not be just drunk, but they would actually leave the party with a new insight of some kind about the topic that they were discussing. And so Socrates considered himself to be a midwife to helping his students giving birth to their own ideas. He didn't tell them what to say and what to think and what to do in life. He merely set the environment within which they gave birth to their own ideas. Likewise, my goal with my work is to create this kind of intellectual, fertile environment where hopefully, if I've done my job right, after you watch, my interviews and you read my blog topics and stuff, you don't accept what I say I believe, but you come up with your own truth, with your own beliefs, and you consider them useful and applicable and practicable for your own life, for your own improvement and for your own benefit. And that would mean that I'm better off because I accomplished to do what I wanted to do, and you're better off because you're reaping the fruits in your own life, both of me setting up that environment, but also of you putting the hard work to give birth to those ideas and the hard work to actually implement them and to make them happen. So we're all better off in the end if that were to happen.
And last one, Nikola, what's your message to people? And I know that you are optimist. Could you motivate people?
I don't know if I'm an optimist, but I would say to people that technology is not enough. That's my message. It has been my message for 10 or 15 years now, because people say, in the future, technology would solve all of our problems. That's not true at all. Look at global warming. We know the science. The science is absolutely incontrovertible. We know what must be done, and yet we're not doing it, right? We know what must be done. We actually have the science and we have the technology to do what needs to be done today, and yet we're not doing it. So technology is necessary, just like science. It's not enough. What is also necessary in addition to technology is ethics, is the commitment, first the education to understand the implications of our science and technology, and then taking responsibility as per the cases of when we decide to use our technology and not to use our technology, because sometimes not doing something also is a good thing or has ethical costs and benefits. And in other cases, it would be used as a motivation for us to do something proactively, to improve something for the betterment of humankind. Right? So that's my message. Technology is not enough. It is necessary. It's not sufficient. It's great. We have the best technology we've ever had in the history of our civilization. Unfortunately, if we don't use that technology wisely, we can end up destroying ourselves, right? So it is not enough just to have the best technology. What is also necessary is a good, wise choice of how and when to use that technology for the betterment of humankind. And what are the costs attached to using that technology? Because, we know, as we discussed previously, in the early 20th century, cars replaced horses. We were not aware at the time that that kind of a choice would be a major contributor to global warming. We were never aware of that fact at that time, right? So we never considered the implications of that choice. We only saw the technology and the better convenience and comfort and usage and the speed of the new cars compared to the horses and all that stuff. We never saw the cost. Now we actually see the cost and we're still doing nothing about it, right? So you can say maybe 120 years ago we have an excuse. Today we no longer have an excuse. We have the science, we have the evidence, yet we're doing nothing, right? And that's why I keep telling the same and the same message. And sorry for repeating myself, but it's so important to be committed to this. Technology is very, very important. It is not enough. And the future of humanity, both individually for us personally, as individuals, as workers, as citizens, as professionals, as entrepreneurs, and collectively as international organizations, as corporations, as businesses, as nations, and even as our planetary human civilization, will be decided not by the technology itself that we use, but by how we use it. Because technology is, but by why we use it and when we use it, and towards what purpose. Because the technology is just how we do things. It's not why we do things, and it's not what we should be doing. And those are the choices of when to use technology, why to use it, towards what purpose, and so on, and why to use it in the first place that would determine the success or the failure of our civilization, not the technology itself.
Powerful. Nikola Danaylov, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.